This weekend at Mass, we heard the Gospel story from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 22 to 33, and it's the famous story of Peter walking on the water. Someone once said that the job of the preacher is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And I completely agree with that statement. I think it's very, very insightful. However, it's one thing to believe it and another thing to actually do it. One of the challenges of a preacher is, well, how do you know who is who? Who needs to be comforted? Who needs to be afflicted? But I think the real question is not so much who is who as when is when, because the truth is that we all, at different times in our lives, need to be comforted, and we all need to be afflicted or challenged. Think about it. If we're only ever consoled and comforted, we can become soft, incapable of dealing with the harsh realities of this life. And if we're only ever challenged and afflicted, we can become hard and embittered, and we can break. To really mature and to be the people that we're called to be, to live life to the full, we need a little bit of both. And Jesus shows us this weekend in the gospel. The gospel story tells us that Jesus, after he finished praying, that he went down to the lake, and the disciples were in a boat on the water, and we hear that the boat was being battered by the waves. It was far from the land, and the wind was against them. And that's quite a metaphor for life. I mean, who of us has not felt like that sometimes, that in life, when we go through the storms of life, that we're just being battered about, that we're absolutely powerless, or that we're far from land, we're far from what is familiar and comfortable, and the wind against us, it's no matter what we do, we can't seem to make any progress. I remember a number of years ago visiting friends in Cape Breton Island on the Bredor Lake, and I decided to go on a kayak, and I crossed the Bredor Lake, and it was pretty easy. However, on the return trip, I found out why it was so easy. It was because the wind had been at my back, and now the wind was against me. Not only that, the wind was stronger, the current was stronger, the waves were bigger. And no matter how hard I paddled, I didn't seem to be making much progress. And then I also realized something that I should have known if I had checked a map, that the Bredor Lake is not really a lake, but the Atlantic Ocean. And at one point I realized that if I kept going in the way that I was going to end up on my way to Newfoundland. It was quite a scary experience. It was exhausting. And it took me a long time. I eventually did arrive back to safety. But I've never forgotten that experience of what it's like to be battered by waves and have the wind against me and to be far from land. And sometimes we feel like that in our lives. Sometimes we can feel like that as a church. Our church has been through a lot in these last 10, 20, 30 years. We've been battered by many waves, many crises, many scandals. We feel far from land. So much of what has been familiar to us, especially in this pandemic season, has been torn away from us. It's been removed from us. And it can be very disorienting, especially with this whole process of amalgamation. We often, sometimes even don't know the names of our parish, or we seem to be stripped of the particular identity of our communities. And to make matters worse, now you're stuck with a new priest who's doing newfangled things and talking about going in new directions. The wind often seems against us. You know, the whole system that we've inherited as a church is built on a set of presumptions that the wind would be at our back, the wind of culture. You know, 40, 50 years ago, you could presume that most people thought believing in God was a pretty good thing, that most people thought that going to church was a pretty decent thing, and that you could presume that most people had a Christian worldview. Whereas today, not only can you not presume that, you can quite easily presume the opposite. And so the wind is against us. Yet no matter if we experience the storms of life individually, personally, or as a parish, one thing I know to be true is that Jesus comes towards us. He comes to us, and he speaks the same words to us now as he did 2,000 years ago. He says, "Take courage, take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." Don't be afraid. Notice that Jesus does not immediately calm the storm. Rather, he comes to us in the midst of the storm and immediately reveals his presence to us. And this is what the Lord is doing today. He is revealing his presence to us, each in our own lives and whatever storms we're encountering, and as a parish. And in the midst of our afflictions, Jesus wants to comfort us. Jesus comforts the afflicted. But he also afflicts the comfortable. Peter says to the Lord, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. Come on, Peter. Come on down. Leave the safety of the boat. Come and walk on water. And Peter lets go. He gets out of the boat onto stormy seas. What a metaphor it is. Because the truth is that just as we can be paralyzed by our fear in the midst of the storms of life, we can also be paralyzed by what makes us comfortable, by what makes us feel safe. We can be paralyzed by what is familiar. We can be paralyzed by anything to which we cling that is not Jesus himself. So the question for us, as we hear the consolation of the Lord, is, are we able to experience the affliction of the Lord? In the storms that we're experiencing right now, how do we experience Jesus calling us to get out of the boat, to let go of what is familiar? I think that in order to experience both consolation and affliction, we need to be able to hear his voice. We need to be able to hear him say to us, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. We need to be able to hear his invitation to come, to get out of the boat. And dear friends, that's only going to happen through the experience of prayer. A type of prayer that's not so much about us talking to God, telling God what we want him to do, but an experience of prayer that's about listening to the Lord. And the privileged place to listen to the Lord is found in the scriptures. And so I'd like to give you homework again, just like I did last week. And it's to go to the scripture reading from Matthew chapter 14, to take 10 minutes at some point in the coming week and quiet yourself, ask the Lord to open your mind and your heart, and to gently read the gospel reading in a reflective way, and allow Jesus to speak to you in the storm, your own personal storms, the storms of our parish right now. And pray for the grace to experience his comfort, to hear his voice saying, take heart, it is I am with you. You're not alone. Don't be afraid. Let's also ask for the grace to hear his invitation to each of us and as a parish to let go of what is comfortable and familiar and get out of the boat, because it's only when we experience both, comfort and affliction, that we will become the people God calls us to be, that we will become the parish he's calling us to be, that we will experience the fullness of life. God bless you.